And we are live with our 35th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm at CK Tricky on Twitter. Ken Johnson. I don't know why I did that backwards, Seth. Like usually it's I'm Ken Johnson. I'm at CK Tricky on Twitter. Anyways, I am joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter.
Hey everybody, welcome back once again. 35th episode, just rolling along. Excited to have everybody. We're joined this week by Travis McPeak. Say hi, Travis.
Hello.
Travis, we're going to do a full intro on Travis, but if you have interest in like AWS security, security operations in the cloud, things of that nature, you definitely want to see this episode. It's going to be a fun one. We're going to get into it. But before we do that, Seth, I know that we're going to talk a little bit about SSRF as part of the AppSec Minute. I think you're going to lead.
Sure. Server-side request forgery. I've been dealing with it. Just this assessment, it's on the top of my mind, right? Because I've been dealing with it the last couple of days on one of the assessments that I've been working on. And, the more you dig into it, the more kind of like tools and different resources that you find for something like this. Ken, you've dealt with server-side request forgery before, obviously. This is the ability to tell a server to actually go out and make a request for something else. And if the attacker can modify that request in any way, we can have it retrieve resources that the application doesn't necessarily intend to consume, whether that's some sort of cloud, keys or something else like local internals for AWS is a very common one. We'll post up a couple of different repositories and attack payloads that you can play with. The one thing that I wanted you to recognize with SSRF, though, is that anywhere that there is some sort of an IP address or a host name that's actually being sent to the server is a place that you should be looking for server-side request forgery. The one that I recently found was actually in the host header, right? The HTTP host header, that they were taking that value and actually appending it to do a lookup or to do a redirect behind the scenes. Which made it really interesting. And it was one that Burp Suite didn't find by itself. And even when I tried to force it along and say, hey, look in this spot, the Burp Suite scanner never identified it as vulnerable, but I was able to actually have it look up things, send me data, and pull stuff down from my systems locally, even though Burp Suite and Burp Collaborator weren't finding it. Ken, have you run into that before where Burp doesn't actually find something that you expect it to?
I mean, in terms of SSRF or just in general?
I guess SSRF, let's keep it to that, right?
Yeah, no, I haven't had that specific thing happen. Only for the simple fact that, as you know, I spend a lot more time with code reviews for several years now than I have in like dynamic testing world. Usually dynamic testing for me is like validation of what I'm finding in the source code. So it's hard to say. I did have one thing I wanted to add though there that was pretty interesting because we did the HackerOne event. And so what we did is we had like an SSRF target internally. And we gave that out to, obviously like the 100 hackers or whatever that were there. And so what would happen is they would get, if they found SSRF and they wanted to validate it, you get back a like a random UUID, but also we log that UUID to like our logging console or our logging app, I should say. And so we could go through and, basically like we could see where that request came from, see the UUID. And so when they provided that UUID to us, we could kind of validate and trace back and just kind of see how all the pieces fit together. So I guess what I'm saying is it's a good idea, I guess, if you're running like a bounty. This is like totally separate from the educational part, but if you're running a bounty, it doesn't hurt to have an SSRF target that you list.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. One thing that I found to be very useful for me, just because, when you're crafting that attack payload, you don't always know how the server is going to handle the different components that you send it. So if you need to actually be able to insert, a slash for a directory or whatever that you want to pull from, that may not always pass through. Like in the host header, I was seeing that filtered out, and it took the an external site that I was actually using, like what you're talking about, and interacting with to troubleshoot how the payload was being used by the application. And this was even an application that I had sourced to, but it always depends on what those different layers are that may be sitting in front of the application as well, like your Nginx, your Apache modules, right? Everything else that sits in that layer may actually change those host values or change those parameters in some way as they're being sent to the application.
They might. And then also, if you have it in like parameters, it could, like sometimes the, like an Nginx or Unicorn or something, they might detect that like the parameters this isn't necessarily SSRF specific, but if you had like, like a traversal payload or something like that in the URL, there are like modules where Nginx will just say, no, that's not okay. Like I'm not gonna, that's not valid. And it is good to test in a prod environment and validate.
Yep, exactly. So that's SSRF. We're posting up a couple of different repositories and things that were useful to me over the last week in, exploiting that and actually identifying it first of all, but then exploiting it. If anybody else has other resources, I started a Twitter thread. I'd love to, see what else people are using there. Just because it is kind of, I like the term hipster, right? It is definitely the hipster vuln nowadays. A lot of people are jumping on that and attacking it. And a lot of the bug bounties are paying out pretty substantial money for it just because of the danger that's involved. So that's SSRF. Let's switch over to Travis now. I think, Ken, you've got like an introduction that you were going to walk into.
Yeah, firstly, let me say I am personally very excited to have Travis on. I think, you and I were talking about this, Seth, like, so we've seen, you and I went to reInvent, and just in general, I've seen a lot of what, Netflix does, on the AWS security front and some of the tools. And, for me, it's amazing that we get to pick Travis's brain. And so I should probably go back and say, so Travis is a senior security operations engineer at Netflix. Travis also helps out or co-runs the OWASP Bay Area chapter. The OWASP Bay Area chapter. Member of the OpenStack security team, Cloud Foundry, etc. Has presented at AppSec Cali, B-Sides SF, Black Hat USA, reInvent, and Enigma, and has a few projects. And I know I really want to talk about RepoKid, but RepoKid, Bandit, Recon BF, these are some of the projects that Travis works on or his projects. And so I think where I want to start. Well, first, hi Travis, thank you for coming on.
Awesome to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, we're really, so it's funny because one of my favorite things that I've ever seen was at the time, now, it was Repo Man. And Seth and I were sitting together at reInvent and we're watching this concept of, permission management based off of like, you use it or lose it. And that was amazing. And you can certainly talk more to that. But just that alone was one of the coolest things that I had seen. And now you work on RepoKid, and so it's exciting to have you here and be able to pick your brain and hear more about how all this stuff actually works and allow people to ask you questions and whatnot.
Sure. Yeah, we have to say that we're huge fans, right? The Netflix team. I think, I first met Jason a number of years ago, Jason Chan, right? We both gave talks at like a network security conference, and I think he and I were the only ones that were in the track talking to each other. So it was super fun. But we've had Asta on as well, Singal. And so we're excited to have you. So sorry, go ahead, Travis.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, I was going to say, Jason's awesome to speak with. And I remember that reInvent, he announced that Repo Man was going to be coming out. And then some time went by and we hadn't released it. And I can kind of shed some light on why that is. So Repo Man, the idea behind it was that we have this data, Access Advisor and CloudTrail, which are two sources of data that Amazon can provide that will tell you, for a given role that you're using, what are the things that the role is actually using and what is it not using. And Repo Man was this nice UI that the idea is that developers will go and visit it and they'll get this information for their own application and then make changes. And so that was all good. But I think just prior to me getting to Netflix, the realization was that developers are actually very busy people and they don't want to go to a UI and like find these things and then go make modifications to their apps. And what would be better is if we just use this data, make intelligent decisions on their behalf, and then make the changes for them. And that's where Repo Man, like this big, fully fledged UI, became RepoKid, which is this. It started off as a little script. You would just run it and it would just like chop out these permissions. And since then, we've done a lot of work to operationalize it and make it mature and logging and all this good stuff that you would expect from something that goes and removes permission from an environment.
I mean, and so like, what's, I mean, you can't, I'm not asking for hard numbers, but, is it more the case that these permissions legitimately, like, they don't need to exist on, the user or the role or the whatever it might be? Is it far more the case you find that like, okay, this actually doesn't need those permissions, or is there ever like sort of a higher, is it sort of a mix, or what would you say?
Yeah, a lot more so just because of the way that we deploy applications. So at Netflix, we believe in developer freedom and high velocity. And the last thing that we want is to have this security review process that some companies have where, the security review process, you're like, this is the app that I want to launch. And then you'll meet with the security team, which might be busy for a few weeks. You get a meeting, you go back and forth about like what's actually required. And from there, you come up with a policy. And then, if we were running RepoKid in an environment like that, then it would only remove permissions that stopped being used over time. What we do instead is we'll grant a base set of permissions that's kind of like our best guess of like things that applications typically need to do. And that's by nature over provision. And so, from there, we take away well over half the permissions that an app actually needs. But that's just because we don't want to slow developers down by making them do a security review.
I love that idea. So you give them more than they might even need, and it doesn't really require. It's very low friction. It's very like, cool. Well, we're just going to give you these baseline set of permissions, and then just have an automated reevaluation of what you're actually using, revoke them as need be. Should work because you're not using those permissions.
Totally, yeah. And one of the, so sometimes we break developers, right? I mean, we try to avoid doing that as much as possible, but it's definitely happened. And one of the things that we can point to is that in the end, we're making their life easier because, we're able to grant these permissions broadly without any requirement of like a security review. And then we can just take them back when they're not needed. So even though we have broken a few developers, in the long run, everybody's happier. We're happier because we get, least privilege, and they're happier because they get to do their work without even like asking the security team for anything.
And I know, and I'm looking at this and I see that it works with SNS, and I know it's not for this reason, but are you able to, since it's already got some work there with SNS, does it notify? I'm sorry, I'm just looking through it now. I'm trying to figure out if it also notifies folks like, hey, well, I guess you'd actually have to know like who to notify, right? So
yeah. So internally we do that. So one of the design goals for RepoKid was to make it very pluggable. So there's certain like business logic for Netflix that I've just implemented as plugins, and that business logic is going to be slightly different for other organizations, and that's implemented as hooks. So you can basically just say, during the repo stage or during the scheduling stage, I want to run this Python code. And in our case, that plugs into a service that we have internally that goes and notifies the owner of the app.
Love it. I really do think that's an amazing sort of like approach to, like, there are never enough security people to constantly be a gate, especially if you're doing, a lot of development. And I think that's a really great low friction way to sort of keep development flowing with some sane security controls as well. So
yeah.
I have to give a shout out to Patrick Kelly and Jason, who had the idea before I got here, but I've been lucky enough to operationalize it at Netflix.
Cool. Yeah. All I was going to say is like, that's always the kind of the recommendation that we go in with is, hey, the more that you can productionalize something that makes it easier on you and the developers in that CI/CD pipeline, the better off both of us are going to be.
Definitely.
So now we can go on LinkedIn and we can look at your background and we can, talk about where you've worked. But what we really want to know is your origin story. How did you know that you wanted to do security? What were there any early signs as a child? How did you get into security? What's your sort of path to InfoSec or SecOps or, whatever name you want to give it?
Love it. Yeah, that's a lot more fun than LinkedIn stalking anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think I've always wanted to do security. When I was a kid, I don't even remember this. I was so young, but apparently I ran around my grandparents' house and I got every pile, like everything that was electronic, and I got it in a big pile. And I was obsessed with like locks and keys. And so like those two together, I mean, for a 3-year-old, I think that's got to be, some kind of an indication of a security mindset. Then when I was a little bit older, I was, programming and stuff like that. I really enjoyed it, but I must have done something that like pissed my parents off, and they put a restriction on the computer, like some kind of a password or something, and I couldn't use it. I wasn't supposed to use it for a month. But there was a couple of edge cases, like things that I was allowed to do on the computer, and they would come and unlock it for me. And one time, my mom came to unlock it for me, and she had wet hands. And based on the position of the wet keys, I was able to deduce that the very clever password they put was W, because W and enter were wet. So I figured out that the password was W, and I maintained persistence for months.
That was literally just the letter W.
Yeah, just W and enter.
Yeah, no, if you're messing with locks as a kid, then that's a definite sign. That has to be, right?
Yep. Yeah, so from then, I mean, I always knew I wanted to be in it. I'd probably be doing this job even if it paid very little or nothing. I just, the whole approach to, there's this control that you're not supposed to be able to get around, and then there's ways around it. It's almost like the modern day equivalent of magic, in my opinion. And it's so cool. I mean, every day I get to come to work and, kind of like apply this very special way my mind works to coming up with things that make, the company I'm working for better, in this case, Netflix. And I'm just very lucky to be here.
Yeah, it's nice that people pay us to do this stuff.
Yeah, totally.
And we don't go to jail for it,
Yep.
Seth and I've talked about this before, where it's like, we like yourself got into this in, maybe a gray area, right? And just kind of doing those things like getting access when you shouldn't get access because it's fun. And so it's nice that you can grow up and be adult and do it for a living, and people pay you. Yeah, you don't get arrested.
Right. Yeah, I was just gonna say, right? You harkening back to like kind of like people view it as magic. I'm actually surprised how often that's the case, right? People that aren't in the kind of the IT or security field, you start talking about, oh, what do you do for a living? And the initial one is always, oh, well, I do like information security and I help secure code, and they kind of glaze over and look at you like you're crazy, and they're like, oh no, kind of like a hacker or for hire hacker, and then they're all like, ooh, this is amazing, and the first thing they ask is, can you hack my Facebook account, right? Or can you hack my email? And you're like, no, well, depends, right? It's always just kind of this weird discussion that you have with people, and they view you as some people are afraid, right? I've had people that won't talk to me anymore after I say something like that. I don't know if your experience is the same that way.
A little bit. Usually people are more in the, can you hack my Facebook, or can you hack my boyfriend's Facebook camp? But if you were to, take someone in the old days, and you're like, I need to get into the castle, and the castle's drawbridge is closed, right? And if the castle runs on IoT and I can press a couple buttons and make the drawbridge open, that is magic,
It is. I mean, it's kind of fun, right? But it also, yeah, I don't know, like representing yourself to kind of the layman is always difficult on, well, you don't understand how much time it actually takes to build up this knowledge, right? It's not just, hey, I turned around and Googled this and the first thing worked, right? I guess that is, script kiddie-ish, but most of the time that I spend, there's a lot of, dang, I bang my head against the wall a lot. That's what it feels like. Just like the SSRF stuff, and probably dealing with RepoKid and trying to implement all this stuff, it feels like it's a lot of no, and then it works once, you're super happy about it, and then you have to document it, right?
Yep. Yeah.
That's my
definitely hard-won knowledge.
yeah. I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's like that Arthur. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say we don't all work at Microsoft like Ken does, like the.
Well, no, I was going to say, you know, they got that Arthur Clarke quote about any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and it's kind of that any sufficiently advanced. Well, I say that, and then you come across like classic ASP and PHP apps, and so all that goes out the window. But I mean, yeah, if it's sophisticated, or I shouldn't even say sophisticated, if it's something that people don't understand, it seems like magic. So,
yeah. There's magic in there too. Unfortunately, there's definitely some stuff. It's like I can't explain every step, from me pressing a button and then that thing being deployed in the cloud environment. I'm sure there's magic in there somewhere.
There is a lot of that little sprinkle of magic, especially with when you get into like DevOpsy type stuff, which is what we've got you on to talk about some of the cloud security stuff. So, like, did you go a traditional sort of like educational route? Did you did you do it a different way? Did you do like entry level IT and then kind of work into the security field? I mean, how did you come about? Yeah, tell us about how you ended up as a, where you're at now.
I actually did
security.
I actually did both. I had a nice little side gig, going in high school where I'd go and fix people's computers, and increasingly that meant like dealing with, virus fallout and stuff like that. So that was kind of, like learning about how do you make a system hard and what are the best like practices for, telling people that don't want to spend their whole life doing computers, like what are the minimum viable things that they should be doing to not have this happen to them again. I did a little bit of software development. One kind of cool project I had was I implemented some software for a railroad when I was in college. So I wrote like everything that they needed for like train management and stuff like that.
So you wrote the original Rails?
Yeah, the original Rails. Got it.
And I'm sure it was just as secure as the original Rails too, right? Or more secure.
I love that. No, yeah, I'm sure it was terrible. Like going back, like even thinking about that code I wrote is enough to give me nightmares. But I did write it. I'm sure it's probably still there running like completely unmodified from when I wrote it like 12 years ago.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. I also did do computer science and stuff like that. I would say that most of, the stuff that I've learned that I use today is not computer science. It's kind of just screwing around, doing stuff, learning how systems work.
Hey, so how did you kind of like come about, hey, there's a security, like here's my first security job, like this is a thing I can get paid for?
Oh yeah, so I always wanted to get into it. I knew that I wanted to be in that field even from a kid. And then out of grad school, I studied information assurance in grad school to hopefully get me, in the door as my first security gig. And I ended up in QA. I actually didn't know what it meant. I just ended up doing QA at Symantec. And once I did realize what it meant, I was like, kind of like, oh, this isn't exactly what I wanted to be doing. So I learned Python, and one of my first tasks was to take this massive pile of test cases, like manual test cases, and execute it against an API, and then report on the results into this horrible system called HPQC, which is probably still in use today. And so I just wrote Python to do all of it. And I wrote the Python script to run every single configuration option, basically in a big loop, and make the API request, automatically capture the results, and put all of it into HPQC and mark that it was done. So it was, I'm sure it wasn't what people intended when they gave me the task, but it was a kind of a cool way to start learning about Python and automation and a lot of stuff that served me pretty well to this day. Also, there's a big overlap between. I think I was actually listening to this on your show last time. There's a big overlap between QA and security. Some of the security tests you were saying like wouldn't like hold up to the standard that a lot of QA goes into, but it's kind of a good way to like learn about the mindset by starting off in testing, because that same mindset does carry over to security testing. And I found a way to carve out a niche. Where, I was working on a DLP product at a time, and one of the, is this a security test or not? It could go either way, but I created a fuzzing payload, which causes a crash in the product, but it also has a security impact. So I think I found a couple ways to kind of get around them wanting me to do normal QA and move into security anyway.
Right. Yeah. If you're causing stack traces, right? I mean,
Yeah.
stack trace could be a SQL stack trace. Like, it's a stack trace. So, you've caused something to go wrong, whether it be parsing, a parsing error or a size limit or whatever the case is. Like, you've caused, yeah, it's very similar. And because I've heard people say that security is like, and maybe Seth, maybe you've said this too, is like, we're just glorified QA testers.
Yeah. Poor glorified QA. I mean,
Right.
well, not poor, like we're very well paid, but not as disciplined as QA testers, right? If you're coming from that background, and you look at security testing, and it's always like, oh, what do you think you guys are doing on this side? You don't even have like a test case, a use case built on what you're actually testing. You're just throwing stuff in an application.
Yeah, actually, you're not kidding, because my brother-in-law does QA for a living, and it's like very regimented. And there's like there's a ton of I mean, I think that they use like an actual checklist that they go through for each
Yep.
like feature or whatever that's being added. So it's actually, yeah, it's definitely more structured for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, and if you're coming up from that, from that portion, it's interesting though that you took a job at Symantec in QA, but so basically you're saying that was mainly because it was Symantec and it was a security firm. You just weren't sure what it was.
Yep, totally. But I ended up getting into the security part anyway, just by force of will more than anything else.
Yeah. See, so security testing, right? It pays off. That's what what I'm taking out of this, right? Totally. But everybody does have a slightly different path into that. So.
Yeah, I think there's actually, I think you were talking about this last week. I think that there's probably some parts of that QA discipline that could help us be a little bit more, formal with a little bit more formal, a little bit less like gut intuition in our security testing as well.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing that I don't want to see is take away the kind of the free thinking that a lot of the security testers have, is thinking outside the box. Because that's the other thing that I balance out, right? I've seen a lot of QA testers that, they get their list of requirements, and that's the only thing that they look at, right? They get that checklist and they move through it all, and they're very good at documenting and actually finding that. But edge cases are not something, unless somebody else gives them a requirement to test an edge case, they don't include it in there. So the goal is different. So it's kind of this weird balance. It's almost like you need a security QA team, or you need to balance the two together, have them work together to actually find those vulnerabilities that are outside of the norm.
Totally. Yeah, I would say maybe the one part of QA that could carry over is that, I think in security we have the tendency to like kind of swarm on the sexy component, the thing that like it's like a one-stop breach, and so we kind of spend a lot of time on that. Whereas a QA, they have like their plan and they have to address every component. And, maybe we could do with a little bit of like, oh, did we look at that thing that's a two-step breach?
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's the other thing, right? It's the whole red team versus blue team argument almost, is that, I think most of the security testers, yes, on the application security side, most of us are ex-developers, but most of those testers are red teamers. So all they care about is, hey, I need to find that one little hole. And there may be another whole portion of the application over here that they, are just ignoring because they're looking only for SSRF. That's their bag.
Yep.
So yeah, I see both sides, but I also feel like the industry's been so focused on that one side of testing versus the actual, QA portion that there needs to be some balance.
Totally. Yep. 100% agree.
I did want to mention Dave Corsi's quote here, which is QA test equals use cases and a pen test equals misuse cases.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good way to look at it. Kind of like that summary there. Nice job, Dave. So yeah, like definitely want to talk a little bit about your, because we got about 30 minutes left. So
it's already fun, like you said.
Yeah, we always eat it. It goes so fast. So, yeah, if you could tell everyone about like kind of like your day-to-day operational role, and we'll just go from there because we've got lots of questions. So,
Sure. Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I would say that the function of my team at Netflix is to make it so that everything that you're doing with AWS is done securely. And by you, I mean like our customers, the developers. And a lot of that is taken care of for us by Spinnaker, which is this really awesome tool that we use for delivery engineering. And basically, developer just clicks a button, they get an application. The application can deploy into all the things you want it to, using security groups and load balancers. And then what we've done as a team is build, kind of the paved road around that. So like developers want certificates, and sometime prior to me getting here, I know you've talked about it on the show before as well, but sometime prior to me getting here, someone decided that certificates are hard and there should be a point, click button thing that handles it for them. So we've integrated, Lemur with the Spinnaker paved road. And so kind of a lot of the time that I spend is on, making paved road solutions to reduce the friction for AWS things. A separate component that we have is operational work, which in our case is mostly caused by the fact that my team owns IAM permissions. IAM permissions in AWS are very powerful. We want that to be restricted to a very small set. And so, one thing we've done is like, make a paved road to get AWS credentials. But we also work on like templating, config as code, stuff like that. So there's an operational component and then an architecture component, so like what is the way, what kind of controls can we apply to this environment to make it so that, like account segmentation and stuff like that, that would really help to make it harder to breach our environment.
So do you have like one thing that people talk about is they have an issue where they've got 300 literally like 300 in AWS environments they have to manage. I don't know if you have like a similar challenge that you all have to work through with that.
Yeah, we have a bunch of accounts as well. And we, one of the things that my team has created is a service that's kind of the inventory of accounts, and we can put metadata about the accounts in there. So like, who is the owner? Like if something's going on with this account, who should we contact? Who makes decisions on its behalf? Also, which services belong in the account. So like RepoKid, for example, there are some accounts and the owners, have told us that there's good reasons for it. They don't want us to be running in their account. So, one thing we'll put in this service is like, this is a RepoKid enabled account versus this other account is not.
Okay.
So it all goes back to application inventory, right?
Yeah, everything's application inventory and security. It's like the hardest problem.
Yeah. So when you guys solve that and come out with, like even a new tool, right? Just make sure and share for the rest of us.
I can tell you people are working on it.
Sweet. Sweet. So how do you've got kind of that paved road path. I know when we talked to Asta, she mentioned that a lot of the developers are very security conscious. So they come to you guys. Do you still have teams internally that are not, following your prescribed direction in the AWS environments? And how do you handle those guys?
Sure. Yeah. We really try to build a good relationship with developers where they'll want to come to us, and they'll the training that we focus on is really around identifying, these are the things as a developer that you should know. Oh, okay, this is a security thing I should ask the team. And of course you don't have to do it. So Netflix is very context, not control is one of our virtues. And that means that you don't have to do anything. We're not going to like come in as a security team and force you to do something. And so in those cases, we really tried to build sort of like an alarm system, that'll like let us know as a security team when we see certain types of behaviors and we're like, oh, it's time for a visit with the blah, blah, blah team.
One thing that I'm curious about, and I'm trying to think of how to phrase this so that it makes sense, because like the reason I've sort of the challenge that I've seen is that, like you've got it's very easy to say like, oh, this environment spun up, I don't know, 3 RDS databases. They've got 4 EC2 instances, etc. But you may not know all, like, or they've used ops work, whatever, like sometimes it gets more complicated, and there's things that like you have no idea what, why that's in use, right? And queuing services and caching and like Redis or Memcache and stuff like that. And so now you've got all these different components, but you may not know, like, first of all, I don't know if basically like what the threat model is for what these you see these boxes, but you don't necessarily know what's running through them, maybe, unless they tell you, right? So how they're architected, maybe that's, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know, like, does it matter if you know exactly what data is flowing through these boxes and how they're like secured and locked down? Or is it such a situation where you're like, no, like we only run with, like hardened boxes, and we've locked down network access in such a way, and we have these other mitigating controls that like I don't really need to know perhaps like like I said, what data is flowing through these boxes, or how they're like, does CouchDB make sense? Like, is that like, what are the issues with CouchDB? Or is it just, they're like, it doesn't matter, we do enough with AWS security controls, like we don't have to be super concerned?
We do both. Yeah. So the first part of what you said is like, do we know what's on the boxes? And in our case, we do, because the way that we create these instances is that we will bake everything. So there's a baking process, and then that all is built on top of our base AMI. And from there, since it's all built on the base AMI, we get a lot of things for free, like nice security controls, but we also get a manifest of everything that goes in there. And so we can do both. We can go and say, after the fact, like, oh, crap, there's a new OpenSSL thing. What are all the boxes that have baked with that? And we can push out a notice and say, it's time to roll a new one. And we also get, because they're all built on that, that single golden image that gets a lot of love from our engineering team, we also have a lot of, security controls and things out of the box that just come with it.
Oh, nice. So you've gotten both the information that you need, and you've got the security controls. Nice.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess another benefit to putting things through a paved road is that if there's like one central way of creating resources, then you can apply tagging to it as well. So if like, Spinnaker knows who the user is that's creating it. And so if, for any resources that are managed by Spinnaker, it can apply a tag and say, I know who this person is, they made this thing, and then apply that person's group onto the resource.
Interesting. So I know you do a bit with proactive security controls. Do you deal with any of sort of the, maybe it's not necessarily reactive, but it's like in the event that something happens, like for logging and whatnot, like, or even alerting in real time that stuff is going down. I don't know if you deal with any of that, or if yours is if your work is more focused on just like kind of making sure everything is done right from the outset.
Yeah, actually, that's been something I've been working on a lot lately. Personally, is how can we do something sane with alerting? There's a million tools that can produce various signals of quality that something's going on in your environment that's bad, and if you let them, you can get drowned in alerts. You see situations where there have been breaches where the companies had alerts that told them about the bad thing happening, and so these things really need to be like tuned very well. And if you ever get to the point where, like, we're not going to run a SOC full of analysts just clicking through alerts every day. Our general mode of operating is that every single one of these alerts should be owned by the team that's closest to it. So in my case, all the infrastructure alerts should be owned by my team. And part of our on-call burden is servicing those alerts. So getting the tools to the point where the alerts are tuned properly, that we're getting enough value from it, where it's worth like going into every single one of those, is what I'm really focused on right now.
So I'll use sort of a dumb example. So like, for instance, application failures, that doesn't belong to you, obviously, that in the sense that memory utilization is real high. So like another instance has to get spun up. That may not be something that relates to, but like, or something you want to hear about, but like maybe somebody logging in with a root account or something. Like I said, it's kind of a dumb, silly example, but something like that would be more of something that would fall under the sort of infrastructure concern, or even like permissions changing on, like, I don't know. I'm just sort of making stuff out, like permissions changing on an S3 bucket, or I don't, whatever the case may be.
Totally. Yeah. So the first example that you mentioned, the performance stuff, is handled by a separate team. We have a really nice kind of shared infrastructure here that, you get dashboards, and all of your apps that are built on this, standard base image kind of just have all this stuff out of the box, and it works nicely. So that's not something that we have to worry about. We do care about the security infrastructure component, and for like root account, somebody logging in with the root account, we would take a very proactive approach to that. And we would, my team is the only one that can log into the root account. We have that, set up with a process where all of these are, obviously like two-factor. And the way to access those, you need two of us to get to it, and cool stuff like that. So we wouldn't see any root account logins. But things that you would see in CloudTrail, like, somebody modifying permissions on an S3 bucket, we would take two steps to that. We would first try and limit the number of people that can do that, because it's something that people have screwed up a lot in the past. There's been a lot of organizations that have, had bad things happen because somebody inadvertently made an S3 bucket public. So we try and limit the people that can do that. We try and create tools that make it, easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing. And then we also have a CloudTrail detection component of that. And we'll do some filtering, with a tool like StreamAlert, and see that, okay, this is a bucket that should not be public, and now it is. And, this is the person that did it. And then we can respond from there.
So we get a lot of viewers who they're like basically one or two security people for the entire org, and they're using AWS. And, like if I'm in their shoes and I've got someone like you on and I can ask you a question, one of the things I would ask you is, what are some simple things that I should be alerting for? We talked about like the root account login, but what are some basic proactive steps that I could take and I could be alerted on, or I could maybe delegate the alerts to someone, but either way, someone could see that something bad is occurring in AWS.
Sure. Yeah. Actually, I'm doing a QCon talk tomorrow, and this is very fresh in my mind because a couple of these things we're talking about in the talk. One of them is knowing what's normal for your account. So like these are the regions that that my account uses, and these are inactive regions. And if you see something in an inactive region, that's a pretty big indicator that something's going on. What are the normal calls? Like what are baseline like behavior of like CloudTrail tracked API calls? For the account, if you see all of a sudden like a flurry of IAM stuff, that's something that's very restricted to us. So, in our environment, we can say, these are the users that should be performing IAM. And if I see anybody else even trying to do that, that's probably something bad. And we also invest in per role level detection. So we can see, because, we have RepoKid and we're watching CloudTrail continuously anyway, we can keep track for applications, like what are the base set of actions they're performing. And we, of course, use that to take away stuff that they're not using, but we can also see if they're doing something weird all of a sudden. Like, one attacker, common attacker first step is S3 list buckets, right? It's pretty benign. A lot of apps or roles have that permission. And if you see S3 list buckets for something that doesn't use S3, that's pretty weird.
Yeah, that would be strange.
Yeah.
That would be very likely abuse or someone poking and prodding. Yeah, that makes sense.
We've seen it before too, and we've just reached out to the developer and said, hey, what's going on, with this app you own? And they said, oh yeah, that was me. I was doing some stuff on instance. But, one of these days we're going to catch somebody doing something bad with that.
You're going to find Chris Gates doing something.
Yeah, I was going to say that tool that Ken and Chris just came out with, that you could almost run that and see what kind of alerts you fired and go from there, right?
Totally. Yeah, one of some tool like that actually tripped up a researcher one time for us. They were just running one of the typical AWS enumeration things, and that was, like one of those calls was super weird for our account, and we're like, what's that?
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, there is because a couple other tools, ours included, have a way where really there's no like you basically, if you get a key, you just basically request each service to see if like you have access to it. And if you don't, then you say you don't have access. And if you do, obviously, but doing that is very noisy. So right. I would imagine it would definitely trip up an organization such as yours. I'm sure that would trigger some alerts.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even like the preventions, if I as attacker am using something like that, I'm going to go disable, CloudTrail or, whatever up front, and that should trigger, right? I mean, you would hope that someone would notice that happened before something else went on. But
yeah, also something we have very locked down. Very few people in our company can modify CloudTrail.
Yeah, that's important. So yeah, because and for those that aren't familiar, CloudTrail is your logging for AWS, period. That's like where your logs exist. Although now you could actually clarify this, because Travis, my understanding is that now, or I don't know, like now, right? Meaning like within the last, since I last looked at AWS full time, they have implemented where AWS keeps logs that you like, even if you have CloudTrail disabled, they still have logging on your environment. And I don't know how long that lasts. Does that sound correct? Because that's what I've been told, is that AWS just keeps logs, period. And then you need to enable CloudTrail also, because if you want to do any like actual alerting or analysis or anything like that, obviously you need CloudTrail access.
I'm not 100% on that. I think I've heard something like that too. Honestly, as part of our new account provisioning process, we always, we've got tools that spin up accounts, and it's always like one of the first things we do is turn on CloudTrail. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they do have CloudTrail on your behalf anyway.
Yeah, one of the nastier things that we've heard of, I forget the researcher's name who posted it, but they, on the CloudTrail front, like, how it logs to an S3 bucket, but the researcher didn't want to alert that the CloudTrail had been disabled. So they had access to encrypt the S3 bucket such that the actual security team or the team in general couldn't access the CloudTrail logs, but they could because they had the key for it being encrypted.
Oh, got it. So it's like a cool way of just disabling CloudTrail without actually disabling CloudTrail.
Yes, yeah, and if I can remember the research, it's in our slides too. But yeah, like it's a pretty nasty way to do it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean CloudTrail's so clutch. Like I would definitely make sure that you have all the ways to disable CloudTrail lockdown. Although that's pretty clever. I'm not sure I would have thought of that.
It's an interesting. Yeah, I'll find the researcher's name and put the actual. I'll put their name here. So another question I had for you is like, because here's the thing, and I'm sure other people can relate to this. I can't keep up with all the new tools that come out or services that come out from AWS, but whether it's designed purposefully to be a security service, or it's just something that you found to be maybe like something people don't think about, but can be used as a security service. Like, what services have AWS that are kind of like there for use? I mean, besides like obviously CloudTrail, they're super important or very super useful within AWS to actually like help be proactive.
I am for sure. IAM's like, it's very powerful. It's very complicated. We spend a lot of time, locking that down, because if you don't have a good, IAM story, then there's going to be all kinds of ways into your environment. So yeah, I mean, IAM is in my book is the security service. Yeah, CloudTrail for sure. Can't think of any others off the top of my head, but
I can't imagine you get as much use out of Trusted Advisor. Like, nothing's wrong, and not that there's anything wrong with it, but I would imagine like you guys are just, you've got so many controls and so much architecture built around, how it's locked down. I can't imagine Security Advisor would be of much use.
I think maybe a little bit of use, but either we have it. We have controls that fulfill the same function, or we've written tools ourselves at a time when Trusted Advisor didn't necessarily support something, or between all those things. But I mean, we continuously reevaluate these tools, and all things being equal, we'd rather have Amazon write this cool thing than us like have to write it and maintain it. So we're always revisiting these things, and if Trusted Advisor comes out with something awesome, we'll totally use it.
So the researcher's name is Daniel Grislak.
Daniel Grislak from Atlassian, right?
Yes. Yep. Head of security at Atlassian. Yes.
Oh yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, those blog posts are pretty insane. I'll post a link to his Medium here, but yeah, he's talked a little bit about doing some stuff like that.
Yeah, for our CloudTrail, the approach that we take is we'll centralize it, and then we'll, have it in a very locked down account. That's one way where we can use account level segmentation to, make sure that our core security functions are happening in an account that very few people have access to, and people can't go screwing around with the S3 bucket.
Yeah, no, if someone's messing with it, that's just something, like it's got to be sacred. It does. You have to be able to rely on, and here's the actual article. Like, I found it. Cool. I'm bad at talking and typing. You can't tell.
Everybody is.
That's, God, I've had that conversation before where I'm like, nobody is actually good at multitasking. Every research article you've ever seen on it states that we are not actual true multitaskers. We can bounce around and context shift, but you're context shifting.
That's why demos on stage are so risky, is because a lot of the times, you're concentrating on your demo and then you're not really talking, and people are kind of confused. Like, should I be watching the demo? Should I be listening to you?
Yeah, I went to videos for that reason. I know people are like, oh, it's lame, it's not live. Well, I don't care. It's better for me. So.
There's the spirit.
And better for like 75 to 80% of the, or maybe more like 90% of the people who are watching. So,
yep.
So you have a talk is that you said tomorrow at QCon on,
yep.
Is it already Tuesday? It is. I should know because this podcast is only on Tuesdays. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about what you guys are going to discuss at that talk?
Sure. Yeah, my colleague Will Bengtson and I are going to be we've got a nice pizza metaphor. In fact, lots of pizza metaphors. And the idea is that, as a security team, we're building a pizza that's, got so many controls on it, so many fresh ingredients that an attacker won't be able to finish the whole thing. And basically, we're just going through a lot of the controls, that I discussed on this show, and some other controls that I didn't, and how we can put them all together. And, with all of them combined, you get this environment that is so difficult for an attacker that hopefully they'll go somewhere else.
Do you know if that talk's going to be streamed at all?
I don't know if it's streamed. I do know it's going to be recorded and available at some point online.
Perfect. Definitely would love to put that out to, we can either put that out on the show, or Seth, I'm sure we can find a way to put it on the website or something like that.
Awesome. Oh yeah, we can definitely link to it, from within the episode or whatever, right?
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It sounds pretty interesting. Excited to see it. I don't know, I went down that rabbit hole of actually starting to read that by Daniel Greslock or whatever it is. And it almost sounds like a malware, right? Like a ransomware attack. Hey, we're gonna hold your CloudTrail logs hostage versus your data itself. But it's kind of fun.
Oh, for sure. I'd never heard of QCon, by the way. I'm actually I'm looking at the tracks now on the schedule. It looks interesting.
Yeah, where is that one? Is that just down there in Silicon Valley somewhere?
No, it's in San Francisco. I don't know exactly where. I should probably figure that out.
Yeah, if you're headed there tomorrow, you may want to figure it out. That's that's 12 hours plus away. You're fine. It'll be good.
Yeah, I'll figure it out.
So who runs that one, or how did you find out about it?
Ooh, I don't know that either. My research game on QCon is bad. I've heard really good things about it though.
Nice. So besides QCon, where else can people kind of come see you speak? Where can people meet up with you and talk to you and engage? I know you've done, I'm assuming you're going to be at AppSec Cali.
Yes.
Are you speaking there?
I'm not. Nope.
No.
I'm one of the organizers for it, but I am not speaking. I'm going to leave this speaking to qualified professionals such as yourselves.
Nah.
Well, I don't know about that. Have you seen the podcast before?
You're sorry. No, but cool. I didn't know you were running AppSec Cali. I knew you were involved at some level. That's interesting.
Well, I'm not running anything, but it's a joint effort between the California OWASP chapters.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's right.
I never know how things work, Seth. I never know how things work.
We should have talked about that before, but yeah, that's what I understood there, right, Travis?
In the
And so
OWASP.
that it was the OWASP groups. So yeah, we're excited about that one. I mean, for those listeners that didn't hear, Ken and I will be giving our code review training at AppSec Cali again. So both of us will be there. We'll have to go out and get drinks or something, Travis. Maybe by then we'll have you an Absolute AppSec shirt, and we can pass that along.
Perfect.
Or you can get the last magnet and be super excited about it.
Ooh, either one of those would be good. Yeah, and definitely I'm going to swing by your training. I want to see it firsthand.
Okay. Yeah. Come on by. We have a lot of fun doing it, so it'll be good. Let's see. What else?
Do you give any training on AWS security within the company? Like you literally, do you personally give training?
Actually, my team started doing some training internally pretty recently. My colleague Will started that up, and him and Nog do the training. They're doing it at AppSec Cali. It's very similar to the one that we do internally, except for the internal one is focused on our tools and a lot of the paved road stuff, whereas the AWS one-on-one that they're doing at AppSec Cali is much more, how to use AWS primitives.
Yeah, I remember Will did training at AppSec USA on AWS security.
Yeah, you should have him if you haven't, if you don't have him scheduled yet.
Yeah, we'll talk to him.
Yeah, he's actually coming on, I think, December 4th.
Nice.
So somehow we've convinced you folks over at Netflix to actually give us the time of day. So we appreciate it.
We're taking advantage of it, apparently. Yeah.
Oh, the word's out about the podcast. Everyone wants to come on.
Yeah, that's it. We'll go with that, right? So, just as we're kind of wrapping up, and because we have been going for almost an hour here.
You said
Travis, yeah, and it always does, right? Yeah. There's always I'd rather have a lot to talk about than nothing to talk about.
Yeah, so. I know we still have lots of questions, and especially because we could probably spin off on the whole CI test that you've written path, but that's the thing is we get to this time slot and we're like, oh, okay, we probably need to start wrapping it up. But yeah,
make it so people can actually listen to the show in a a small amount of time. My question.
I'm happy to come back on at some other point.
Yeah,
well, we'd love that.
Yeah, we would love that, right? Because we have had some repeat guests, but definitely it helps kind of extend that conversation, and we can dig into some of those other topics that I know we've kind of talked on the surface about, and we could go deeper. My question to you, though, from an AWS perspective and somebody that's just getting into AWS, I know we kind of talked about the different controls that you would recommend, but from a career perspective, what would you recommend that someone do? I mean, there's multiple conferences out there. There's trainings like Will's giving. There's reInvent. But what is the path? What would your recommendation be to someone that wants to get into cloud security? Where to go?
Oh, first of all, totally do it. It's going to be a steep learning curve. There's times when it's going to frustrate you for sure, but definitely get into it. It's an awesome field. There's a lot of great people in it, tons of awesome work to do. I would say that the best way to do it is to just, there's a free tier account and you can get started, today, click the button, create an account, and just start screwing around, make an EC2 instance and attach it to a load balancer and, go take it from there, have it start communicating with S3. And then, once you do that, you'll realize that there's an S3 bucket policy that you need to figure out. And, and also start reading some of the research from, some of the best people in the fields, learn about how organizations are getting breached, what kind of mistakes keep coming up over and over again. And, just take it slowly. You don't have to learn everything at once. It's a very complicated beast. There's a lot of services and stuff. You don't need to know all of it from day one.
Yeah. So, when you talk about following people or research, who is it that you follow?
That's a good question. Yeah, I usually just I start off on Hacker News every day. I read through all of that, read through our Reddit, r NetSec. All of the good research tends to get upvoted pretty well in there. And, anything with AWS in there is an automatic click for me. That's part of my morning reading rotation.
Okay. Now, that's interesting. I don't think we've talked about RNetSec before, Ken, but that definitely is a go-to for me, right? As far as, hey, what's going on? Like if Ken and I are talking about the podcast and I'm like, oh, it's been a little while and we haven't like talked about current industry trends or the latest vulnerabilities or whatever, it's RNetSec is a good place to kind of aggregate that together, right?
Yeah, but I can pretty much summarize most of that with like, there's drama. Some people agree, some people disagree. There's a branded vulnerability that's got its own website. The end, like, oh, we like have an encryption that's been around for 10 years and turns out it's not that great,
You sound like a dated industry veteran.
Yeah, like that could literally have been that could have been a description for 2014, 2015, 2016, I mean, for any year, just pick a year. And
the problem, Ken, is you're reading the comments. You're not just clicking on the article and then moving on, right?
Yeah. Don't read the comments, not even once.
Not even once. Comments comments ruin the internet.
Yep. Agreed.
Not everyone should have an opinion. No, let me say that. Everybody can have an opinion. Not everyone should speak their opinion. I think that's what we've learned from comments.
Totally true.
Isn't that what the moderators are for, right?
Oh, yeah, they're totally on that. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Watch, we're going to get trolled, and there's just going to be a bunch of shitty comments on this video now.
Yeah, there we go. Cool. Let's see. What else? I feel like we're kind of wrapping up here. Ken, is there other stuff that you wanted to cover before we, call it a night? I did mention AppSec Cali. Come see us there. If there's other places that you would like to see us, that would be great. I mean, you're going to QCon, Travis. You'll be at AppSec Cali. Are there any other conferences that are on your radar?
Oh, B-side San Francisco for sure. Every year. Yeah,
that's right. That's right before RSA, right? Correct?
Yep.
Okay. Missed that. I was going to look. Is that even? Are they doing call for papers or anything like that, or do you know?
I think it's still open.
Okay. Yeah,
I am actually I'm putting your Twitter handle on here this way. If anybody wants to reach out and ask you more questions, they can do that. So we have two. So the reason that you see a lot of like scrolling around is we actually have a Slack chat and the YouTube live chat, and people use both. So we kind of have to monitor both and basically always paste twice. So, but yeah, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm looking forward to a beer in AppSec Cali.
Yeah,
I'm definitely. So and I know like Seth, I believe you're gonna stick around for a bit. I'm definitely sticking around. I'll probably be in. I'm probably gonna stick around for like a week in Santa Monica just because it's beautiful and why not? And so we'll totally be around to do that stuff.
Yeah, Santa Monica does not suck.
No, it does not. I'm trying to. Yeah, one of the beautiful things is you can get an Airbnb for a relatively good price right on the beach out there. So,
yep.
Sweet. Cool. Well, Travis, thanks again for joining us. Find us on Twitter. I mean, we're following each other, obviously, but we'll find, if there's other questions that pop up, we'll send them your way. Otherwise, we'll see you in Cali and we'll see you online. So appreciate it.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on. This is great.
No, thank you. And one of the folks watching already said they're going to start stocking you, waiting for your inventory app to be released. Yeah. So
there you go.
Awesome.
That's what we need.
Cool. More internet stalkers.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's just what I need.
All right. Yeah, exactly. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. See you.